Hello gamers, I am Mike TheZorch and welcome to Retro Spotlight. Today, doing something a little different from our usual fare. Today we're going to be talking about something that's been making the rounds in 8-bit circles and retro gaming circles. A lot of channels have been talking about this, and I think it's time that Gamers Bay covered this as well, because this is sort of a big deal. This is a modern take on the Atari 800XL. Now, the 800XL is a cost-reduced Atari 800, but it's a bit more powerful. And for the time the original 400 and 800 came out in 1979, they were far superior than anything that was out at the time. At that time, the Commodore VIC-20 was coming out in 1980, and the 400 and 800 surpassed the VIC-20 in almost every way. And when this came out in 83, this has the MOS 6502B. Sometimes it ships with the MOS 6502 Sally. It had a new graphics chip, audio chip for controlling the I/O. It was comparable to the Commodore 64 in many ways, superior to it in some. Because of the design of the Commodore 64, it was very slow in loading software from disk. In fact, the disk drive of the Commodore 64 had the guts of a Commodore 64 in it, that loaded the software in the memory and then fed it to the base unit Commodore 64 through its port, and it was a slow process. So this could load software faster than the Commodore 64 could. It also had a high-speed port for connecting to a breakout box that had slots for expansion. So you could add stuff like a modem for connecting to online bulletin boards. At the time where you could, dial up a bulletin board. I think later you could connect up to stuff like CompuServe and things like that. Because the internet existed, but it wasn't public at the time that this machine was out. So software-wise, capabilities-wise, it was comparable to the Commodore 64, and in some ways better than the Commodore 64 in some ways. But let's talk about this machine. Revive Machines is a Polish company that is making a sort of a modern remaster of this system. They're using FPGA, Field Programmable Gate Array. So what they've done is they've taken the Atari 800XL architecture, the chip, and they created a core for the FPGA. And of course, a piece of software that gets loaded into the FPGA, and it programs the logic on the chip so that it functions like the actual bare metal hardware of the Atari 800XL. That's how that works. That's how an FPGA works. So it's not emulation. It is actual bare metal. And what's the difference between actually manufacturing a chip and using an FPGA is that if there is any kind of incompatibility issues, if there's a flaw in the design, if there's a flaw in the design, all you have to do is update the core, and update the firmware, which will contain the core, and boom, your compatibility is improved. Now, the original 800, which sold for about $1,000 back in 1979, is very similar in spec to the Atari 5200, but it wasn't compatible. The 800XL is not completely compatible with the Atari 800, but Atari did release a translator software that sort of fixed that incompatibility and allowed you to load up Atari 400 and 800 software. And so that translation is probably in this so that it could run that software. So you be able to run all original software on this machine. It has a cartridge slot. It has the, we'll move down and look at the ports in just a moment. But this is basically what it looked like. It had didn't have a membrane keyboard. Had an actual mechanical keyboard, and the function buttons on the side, very much like the Commodore 64 in many ways. All right, let's see what their statement says. It says, "This is not a replica, but a new incarnation of the best 8-bit computer from the Atari in 1983. It has a wonderful design that has survived to this day and still captivates a huge fan base." Yes, there is still a very big fan base for this machine. "Its excellent technical capabilities surpassed competitive products at the time of its creation. The RM800XL is a transfer of the original design with all of its fantastic features into the 21st century. It is a combination of tradition and modernity at a level that has not been achieved by anyone before." So let's take a look here. I can't see the names on the label. This is power. This would be some kind of expansion slot. These are the joystick ports that will take your standard Atari joystick ports and USB ports. And there's a USB port here. This is a C port, which I would assume is for power. So these would be used for joysticks, and these are used for joysticks as well. So let's move down here. Of course, you get the keyboard layout. The silk screening is similar or exactly the same as what you would find on the original 800XL. Here's a back view. As HDMI, I believe this is the port for the cassette tape. Not sure about this port. I can't see the labeling on it in this view. And there's the side ports with the joystick ports, the Atari joystick ports, and these USB ports, and one here. I assume you would be able to load up software for this on USB stick. That would allow you to do that. So the RM800XL retains all the ports that allow communication with the environment. So cartridge port, fully functional and compatible with the original socket. The controllers, okay, the two 9-pin sockets, basically for Atari joysticks. Two USB ports for connecting modern game controllers, so I guess Xbox controllers, PlayStation, likely. Peripheral SIO. This is the serial interface, 100% compatible with the original. So it would be a peripheral port. Parallel bus. Okay, this would be probably for connecting to, say, maybe a printer, or I think this was also for their disk drives. I think for the disk drive. Okay, modern monitor port. Classic port with audio to connect to a monitor. Good. HDMI, USB, power in. Yep, USB-C for power, and then their power switch. The interior of the RM-XL is based on modern and highly advanced technology. The computer is powered by RISC and FPGA processors. Our engineers write code only in C and HDL languages. I wonder if they're using an ARM chip in this. The 800XL, the 400, 800, and 800XL software would likely be running off the FPGA, and the rest of the system would be on maybe an ARM or a RISC-V. That would explain why they're able to use USB controllers modern USB controllers on this and be able to use a USB drive to store software on it. That would explain that. On play, the RM800XL guarantees excellent entertainment for everyone. It is perfect for young people who want to get acquainted with the beginnings of computerization, as well as for older but still young at heart people who grew up in the best period of home video game development and can now return to their childhood. The huge library of available great games which are still being developed, yes they are, as well as utility programs, is a guarantee of excellent entertainment for many years to come for the whole family. And here's some examples of some of the games. The Atari 800 had a almost near arcade accurate Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man. I mean, sound-wise, gameplay-wise, visual-wise, the 5200 also, just arcade-accurate ports of the Pac-Man games. And then here's a, I believe this is Karate Champ. It's not Karateka, it's Karate Champ. And the RMXL will be available to everyone very soon, and there's their information from Poland. A email to contact them and everything. This is an interesting machine. This is a very interesting machine. I would love to get a hold of one. I'd like to know how much they're going to be selling these for. Probably not going to be cheap, considering they're using potentially ARM or RISC-V and an FPGA. And did they have to remake the molds for these? Did they have to just redesign the injection molds for these? Because I don't think this doesn't look 3D printed at all. Doesn't look 3D printed. So they either had to recreate the injection molds for the original Atari 800XL, or they had to find them, because the making injection molds for injection molding for plastic is stupidly expensive. If you ever watched Linus Tech Tips, you'll know that they explain it's really expensive to do that. So they had to have found the original ones and then did some modifications in order to accommodate the new ports. It's I'm not sure how they did this. It can't be cheap. This would have to be an expensive machine. I would say I'd be surprised if this sold for anything around $600. I'd be surprised. The minimum I would say would be maybe $600 or $800. Over $1,000 maybe for this. I would be surprised if they went any lower than $600. I've seen recreations with FPGA. I've seen attempts to recreate old 8-bit systems like this before to add modern functionality and recreate the hardware like this before. And the prices have always been very high, about $500-$600 at the minimum, and then up as you add on functionality. So I've seen other systems like this. There's one that's been in development for like forever. Or that is a sort of modern remake of an Amiga, and that's going to cost a bit. So I'd be interested in seeing what this sells for. It says it's going to be available soon. This site went up not too long ago, about a month or so ago. So I'd say a month or 2 months ago, the site went up, and it caused a huge buzz. I am very intrigued. I never had a Atari computer. I know someone who had a 400. I know someone who had an Atari 400 with the membrane keyboard and everything. Never really did anything on it. They never really touched it. They always played their 2600. But this would be interesting to play around with. Since it would have a modern processor in it, I wonder if it would be capable of writing modern games. It would depend on what kind of RISC chip they're using. They specifically say RISC. They don't say ARM. Now, I'm assuming ARM. But there is a lot of different RISC architectures. ARM is RISC-based. But there's a lot of other RISC architectures other than ARM. There's like RISC-V and others. It depends on what is readily available to them. The C and HDL. Is HDL the language used for programming FPGA cores? I forget the name of the programming language they use. It's not like your standard language. I tried looking at what the code looks like. It looks like the ancient language from SG-1. But I am intrigued. I am definitely intrigued. I would very much like to get my hands on one of these and get some of the original software, because this would be an interesting thing to cover here on Gamers Bay, the original Atari XL games, because there was a lot of Atari 800 and Atari 800XL games. Most any game that came out on the the Commodore 64 also released on other systems. Well, I would be very curious to see. Very curious to see the difference, because I'm familiar with a lot of those games on the Commodore 64. I'm very curious to see what they would look and sound like on this machine. I have looked up some videos that compare certain games that I have played, and I have to say, I've been a little bit impressed by the 800XL. A little bit impressed. Anyway, this has been our look at the webpage announcement for the RMXL. If you want to look at this page yourself, I'll put a link to it in the description below. But I am definitely intrigued by this. This is it's a big deal, and I hope that if this is successful, this is at least somewhat successful, that these guys go back and they revive some other computers from back then, because there are other 8-bit computers, 16-bit computers that they could bring back. If they're using FPGA, they can do anything. They could do Amiga. They could bring back they could revive a Commodore 64, although Commodore 64 has been done to death. Modernized Commodore 64s have been done to death. It would be interesting to see what they could do with other systems. Maybe there's a new spec. There's a new Speccy, the ZX Spectrum. There's a new one already out. But there's a lot of other systems that they could revive. I would be interested in seeing what they could do if this is successful. Anyway, again, I've been Mike TheZorch. This has been Retro Spotlight, looking at the RM800XL, which is a modern spin on the Atari 800XL, the computer that is considered a legend in its time. People loved this machine. There is still a huge fan base around it. There is still a whole scene that makes demos and new games for this machine, for the original 800XL. It has a great design. It was a robust system. Comparable, maybe a little bit better than the Commodore 64 in some ways. I will be keeping an eye on this, and I will keep you all updated. Until next time, the next video, I've been Mike TheZorch, and I'll see you later.